This is the case with the West. They developed disproportionately in the area of brutality. They place a great deal of importance and value in violence as a kind of virtue. They think that they can claim the moral high ground basically by throwing someone off of a cliff. So this is just a characteristic that they have. They're violent. And this, again, in my opinion, most likely originates in their rather squalid, harsh conditions. Their so-called civilization emerged from harsh conditions. I mean, Europe is cold. The climate is harsh. There's scarce natural resources. Historically, only about a quarter of the terrain in Europe was arable land. So these are people who were struggling to survive. They had to battle for resources. You know, the modern stereotype of Westerners as being soft and pampered and prosperous and so on. This is truly a modern concept because that has not at all been their history. Material resources became intensely important to them. And whatever means expedited the acquisition of resources, by definition, that was good and admirable. And as I've talked about, the Europeans did not have in their various pagan belief systems any guidance that could enable them to cope with the relative deprivation of their societies. We know that they prioritize the successful acquisition of material resources. And this is the highest good for them. So it doesn't matter for them, it doesn't matter to them that this acquisition is achieved by means of savage oppression, if it's achieved by deceit or treachery or theft. If violence or cunning can succeed, then success is all that matters. If violence and cunning succeed, then it also necessarily means in their minds that peacefulness and honesty are impractical virtues. And an impractical virtue is the same thing as a vice in their mind. In other words, if it prevents you from acquiring resources, then it is categorically inferior and wrong. And that will apply to any real civilized values.
In this are proposing a sort of what white kids get, right? And we are like, you know, we gotta be tough on the kids. They should respect their parents. They should know their place. And, you know, some of the things you're talking about, I could hear some people saying like, it sounds real white. And you're like,
no, actually beating a black child is the whitest thing you can do to destroy them intellectually.
Say it again.
Beating a black child is the whitest thing that you can do to destroy them psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and physiologically. So what I talk about in my book, Spare the Kids, is I go back 2,000 years of history, back to antiquity in Europe, where corporal punishment, this ritualistic violence against children, was born. And,
in Europe.
And there are white guys who wrote books about this. So, you know, when black women say this kind of stuff, nobody believes us. But I got the bibliography. So a bunch of white dudes wrote this before I was even born. And they've tracked all of this violence against children in Europe. Europeans never respected their own kids. They were absolutely brutal and barbaric with their own kids. It's all there. They didn't even recognize that children were biologically distinct until around, you know, the 17th, century. They needed like a whole age of enlightenment to bring them into that awareness. You see it in their art.
Had children working.
They had children working. Children were enslaved in Europe. They were, you had this sort of religious ideology about kids being little demons. Yeah, and that wasn't part of many indigenous cultures thinking about children, including pre-colonial West Africans. So this...
What was it in pre-colonial West Africa?
So in pre-colonial West African cultures, there were, children were regarded as having led deeply spiritual lives before they got here. You think about the naming practices like Babatunde, father has returned, Yedatunde, mother has returned. You would never hit a child because you could drive away their spirit guides. To hit a child was to diminish you as the adults. And so they were so the Middle Passage experience, colonization, in enslavement process, we ended up internalizing some very Eurocentric ideas about children.